is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Andrew Wilson.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The US thwarts a rocket attack on Kabul airport as its final exit from Afghanistan nears its end.
Hurricane Ida roars ashore, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake.
Oil's stormy ride. Oil traders on edge as Hurricane Ida shuts down production in the Gulf.
Fears it could be last call for craft beer makers as COVID and taxes take their toll.
Rockets fired at Kabul's international airport have been intercepted by a US anti-missile defense system. The attack came on the eve of the deadline for troops to withdraw from Afghanistan.
G7 ministers are now meeting to work out how to extend the evacuation program beyond August the 31st. After the Taliban agreed to allow those with valid documents to leave. Yolo Abdafid has this report.
A tense start to the US's penultimate day in Afghanistan. The Americans had warned more attacks were imminent. Just after daybreak, a salvo of rockets was fired near Kabul airport.
Our house is here. We were sitting at home when we heard this terrible explosion, and I thought a rocket had hit somewhere. When I looked out of the gate, I saw rockets being fired at the airport from a car.
It could have been retaliation for US drone strikes on Sunday night, which the Pentagon said killed 2 members of the ISK jihadist group. The US is now investigating reports that as many as 10 civilians were killed in the strike, including children.
This is the Koja Bokra neighborhood, and we live here. A rocket hit a house and 5 or 6 people died. I have nothing else to say. We are distraught.
The Pentagon have now confirmed there was a second explosion.
No military on the face of the earth works harder to avoid civilian casualties than the United States military. And nobody wants to see innocent life taken. We take it very, very seriously. And when we know that we have caused innocent life to be lost in the conduct of our operations, we're transparent about it.
Despite the violence, more people are venturing out, men mostly, queuing to withdraw cash. The Taliban have ordered banks to open, but also limit withdrawals to a maximum of $230 per person. Afghanistan's economy is fragile in the face of so much insecurity.
I think young people are leaving now. If the Taliban and politicians come together, the youth would be willing to stay. But with what we see, young people won't stay in Kabul.
There's bitterness towards the Afghan government who've decided to make a run for it, and the Americans. Food prices are rising and there are fewer jobs.
We call on the Islamic government to announce the government as soon as possible. The situation is very bad. Everyone is confused and travelling to the border to leave the country. We're speechless, and I do not know what the future will be.
The UK government has completed its emergency evacuations, but says it will work with the Taliban to an extent.
They have made certain commitments about not taking out reprisals on individuals, about facilitating exit. Obviously, we are sceptical about those commitments, but we will continue working with them to an extent based on their conduct to try and facilitate that further evacuation and repatriation effort.
The US withdrawal will end on Tuesday. The last flight from Afghanistan will carry its remaining soldiers home after 20 turbulent years. Yolo Abdavid, CGTN, London.
Well, let's go live now to Kabul, where we can speak to Zamarilai Abasin. So, Zamarilai, reports of civilian casualties caused by that US drone attack. What more can you tell us?
Hello, Robin. 10 people were killed in Tuesday attack, Sunday attack that was launched by an airstrike by the U.S., and they claim that it was an ISKP member that they have targeted But I myself went to the area. I talked with the people, the neighbors, and they were telling that these people were living for long years here, and since last 20 years at least, and they were all civilians, and 6 of them were kids from 2 years old to 10, and 4 other were men, member of the same family, including the head of the family. So the people were saying that the head of the family was working as a translator somewhere with foreigners at the Kabul airport, and some others say he was involved in some tech and other issues right there at Kabul airport. But the question remains the same. They are demanding investigation, and they claim that they are civilians. Their family member also say the same thing. At the moment that I'm talking with you, I hear voices of jets, and also I saw earlier a drone on the sky of Kabul, and that's something of alarming situation, while we also witness mortar and rocket shellings around the city, while the airport is at this moment have a defensive system, and they're secure, much secure. Also, roads and paths leading to Kabul airport are much secure. There are several checkpoints installed by the Taliban in coordination with U.S. forces, and the crowds are much less, and we got less than 24 hours, I guess. There was some report that they will leave in almost 20 hours or less than that, and before the end of 31st of August night. So these are the reasons, and people, I've never seen Kabul such silence, such strange, and such, like, the Kabul soul is so different, and when you walk around the city, you see everything, the cafe, the restaurant, the same people, everything, but that soul, that stamina of Kabul is almost lost.
Zamarilai Abasin in Kabul, thank you.
At least one person has died on the U.S. Gulf Coast after Hurricane Ida made landfall in Louisiana with winds of up to 240 kilometers per hour. Homes, buildings and power lines have been damaged. The city of New Orleans is completely without power, although some neighborhoods are now using generators. Well, Edith Tianshan is there and joins us now live. Clearly quite a big storm, Edith. What have you seen?
Well, I have covered a few of those in the past, but nothing of this nature. It was quite difficult to sleep through it, I'll admit, because first of all, we also lost power, although we were in a hotel that technically had a generator. I think most of the hotels, that includes a lot of the places that even had generators, they ran this hurricane. We were already having some gas shortages. So even if you had a generator, it didn't help. The impact is quite significant. Even the impact of the wind on the windows, it was quite loud. It lasted all night through. And since after the morning hours, we just noticed our landscape had completely changed. A lot of the windows broken, street lights essentially knocked off, even trees completely uprooted. And look behind me. What you're seeing here is one of the oldest jazz record stores. It was a historic building made of bricks, but as you can see, it did not survive this hurricane. It survived so many others for decades, but this last Hurricane Ida clearly completely destroyed it. It's a historic building. That's why it is getting a lot of the attention from the local media. Even locals here, they're coming by to take pictures of this spot. Just for accuracy, though, I will say this certainly does not represent the rest of the city. Larger buildings certainly have withstood this hurricane. The bigger impact is maybe in the south and southeast region, closer to the coastline, where some of the smaller wooden structures are. Those have been heavily impacted. But our biggest problem right now is power outages. The entire city of New Orleans has lost power. Our hotel and several others are now completely shut down. We were asked to leave, and I've spoken to several people earlier today. They simply did not have other plans. Some of the people were staying in a hotel because they needed power so badly in the first place. One of the families I've spoken to had one of the adults in the family who had heart surgery, so he was relying on a battery-powered heart device. So that's why he needed to have that device charged regularly. So they're now desperately looking for a place with power. This is really what the general public is experiencing right now. And we are expecting an announcement from the mayor of New Orleans, because we understand not having power for several more days to come represents a major security issue as well.
It is 16 years since Hurricane Katrina. What's different this time?
Well, one would expect after 16 years, not so distant past, they would be better prepared for this hurricane, but they clearly weren't. We were talking about it yesterday from the medical perspective. They weren't prepared because a lot of the hospitals already have very little space because of the COVID-19 patients. And now, given the infrastructure, I mean, we're lucky that we still have a lot of the buildings intact. I mean, the damage in the city is not that extensive. But again, I think it's clear that at least the authorities should have been better prepared with gas fuel storage. Having run out of fuel completely even before the hurricane's arrival is a major issue here. Many people, those who haven't left the city before the hurricane's arrival, are now desperately trying to leave the city. Even though they decided to stay behind for the hurricane, now many people are realizing without power, without fuel, and basic necessities, I mean, all of the stores are closed. Getting food, water, these are premium items here that are hard to come by. So clearly, it is, unless you are fully prepared to ride it out on your own for the next 2 to 3 days, it is not going to be possible to stay in the city and get your basic needs. So people are rushing out of the city right now. We are seeing several cars on the highway leading out. That's why I think it is going to be a major issue. And really all eyes are now on that update from the mayor, because it seems there will be some more measures taken to get ready for the next few days, because we are still far from the recovery efforts. We are merely just waiting for the relief efforts to arrive, especially from FEMA. We understand millions of water bottles and food rations are already on the way.
Edith, thanks very much indeed. It is Chanshan there in New Orleans for us.
Well, the United States could be counting the cost of this hurricane for years to come, as experts warn the damage and losses could exceed $40 billion. For more, I'm joined by Chuck Watson, who's the Director of Research and Development at Enki Research, which tracks tropical storms and models the cost of their damage. Thanks very much indeed for being with us on the programme today. So give us a sense of how bad it's been. What's the scale of the damage, financially speaking?
Well, it looks like Ida's going to easily make it into the top 10 and possibly into the top 4 or 5 most costly hurricanes to hit the U.S. Right now, the initial computer models are saying about 40 to 50 billion U.S. dollars. Again, there's a problem. We're still in the very early assessment phase. So there's some critical pieces of infrastructure that we just don't know whether it survived or how much damage, particularly in the energy sector. The Louisiana offshore oil port is extremely critical. It took a direct hit. The eye of Ida went right across it. So there were probably 20-meter, possibly 30-meter waves and 250-kilometer plus winds striking the structure. So it's designed to handle extreme events, but that's an incredible amount of force on a vital piece. That's the only U.S. port that can handle these very large crude container ships, in other words, the super tankers. So that alone is responsible for about 15% of U.S. imports and exports from as far as petroleum goes. And then you get to onshore, there's about 2 million barrels per day of refining capacity that's offline. We really don't know how much of that was heavily damaged. The eye went right across a couple of fairly large refineries. There were some others that fortunately were out of that damaged swath. But until the engineers get out there and check those structures out, we're just not going to know. It's going to be a few unsteady days in the petroleum and commodities markets until we get a handle. This could be a 1-month problem, could be a 6-month problem.
We know that power has gone to roughly 1 million homes. How hard is it to get that back up and running again, and what kind of problems does it cause in the meantime?
That's another huge aspect of this that is going to be a problem, because ordinarily you don't lose your primary transmission lines, the ones that go from the generators to the substations. The fact that Entergy Louisiana has lost all of the connections to the New Orleans area is pretty astonishing. There had to have been multiple failures, and given the fact that the east side of the city really didn't have that harsh of conditions, it's a little surprising that there's a total outage. So it seems to me like some things broke that probably shouldn't have. Now, you can't even begin to start a recovery until you have electrical power. And as your reporter on the ground was noting, you've got a humanitarian problem starts to kick in, because ordinarily with electrical outages, it's what we call a last mile problem. Some parts of the city will have power, other parts won't. So you don't have to go all that far to find an open gas station or supermarket. But when an entire area loses it, then obviously it's a much bigger issue, because you have to go much further to get supplies if you even can. And it complicates the rebuilding effort. It complicates security and safety issues, because without power, you unfortunately tend to get a little bit of strife and looting and that sort of thing going. And fortunately, we haven't had any reports of that. But as time goes on and the rebuilding and recovery process gets delayed by the power outages, that becomes more likely. When we look at Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, it could be as much as 15–20% of the damage total was simply because it took so long to get the electric grid back up.
And Chuck, this is an area that is still recovering from Katrina 16 years ago. So how long do you think this recovery will take?
Well, unfortunately, the Louisiana coast, not just this area because of Katrina, but of course last year with Hurricane Laura, it's been hit with multiple storms the last decade and a half. And so it's never really recovered from the previous event before the next one hits. The other complicating factor is each one's crossing a slightly different area. So you've got multiple damage slots. And there's just not been an opportunity to really recover from the last storm before the next one hits. So that just creates a compounding problem.
Okay, Chuck Watson, thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme today.
Very well.
Well, that area, the Gulf of Mexico, produces just under 2 million barrels of oil per day. Hurricane Ida forced almost all offshore oil production to be suspended before making landfall. John Terrett is in New York for us. John, what kind of impact will that have, do you think, on supplies, and how long will it last?
Well, guys, I think the takeaway from our previous two speakers on the program tell us everything we need to know, and that is, just as with Hurricane Katrina 16 years ago this very day, I don't think the full picture is yet out there. I remember when Hurricane Katrina slammed into the Gulf Coast 16 years ago, it was a couple of days, I think, before we realized the enormity of the flooding. And I have a feeling that this is what we're about to live through here. You have to remember that the oil rigs and platforms and other bits of paraphernalia that bring the oil ashore from the Gulf of Mexico, it's pretty much still closed down. Or if any of them are operating, then they're just eking little bits of crude oil through to the mainland. And as you know, sort of 90%, more than 90% of the oil rigs and the derricks and the platforms that are out there have been shuttered for the last couple of days over the weekend. We think they've weathered the storm. We think so, but we won't know for certain. There's about 1,800 of them out there in the Gulf of Mexico. 80 to 90% of them are actually off the coast of Louisiana. And this is the problem, that the hurricane stormed into the southern part of Louisiana around places like Grand Isle, which is a barrier island. And I think we could well find that there's severe flooding and power outages in places like that for many, many weeks to come. So the attention now really, as I think our previous speaker was suggesting, is to look at the oil refineries. Now, depending on which location you look at or what they actually refine, there's somewhere between about 5 and 10 of them in the New Orleans area at the moment, where, as you know, they have absolutely zero power. About a fifth of all the United States refining capacity goes through those refineries and the associated businesses that they have in that area at the mouth of the Mississippi River. So, according to Gas Buddy, which is a website widely quoted here in America, the cost of this could be 3 to 8 cents on a gallon of fuel, because Americans buy their fuel for their cars in gallons. So 3 to 8 cents on top of a gallon of fuel. And Gas Buddy also tells us that the Colonial Pipeline, remember that? The Colonial Pipeline that was hacked, it runs all the way from New Orleans up to New Jersey, pretty much on the Jersey side of the river behind the stock exchange here. Well, the bit from New Orleans up to North Carolina is apparently closed at the moment, so that could add to problems as well. You heard from our reporter in New Orleans that there's 1 million outages in the state of Louisiana, no power in the city, and according to CoreLogic, which is a California-based analyst company, depending on which set of their figures you believe, there's somewhere between $40 and $200 billion of costs coming down the pike to pay for all this. But I mean, the key thing is, at the moment, we just don't know.
And John, on the international picture, OPEC Plus members meeting on Wednesday. How do you think this will affect their deliberations?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, at the moment, in America, the main brand of crude oil is called WTI. It stands for West Texas Intermediate. And in the UK, of course, it's Brent, but here it's WTI. Now, at the moment, WTI is going up, and it's had some pretty big gains in the course of the last year as well. Now, as I say, we think Ida has probably skipped the oil rigs and the platform. So we're looking now, as I just said, at the production capacity in and around New Orleans. But OPEC is likely on Wednesday, when it meets on the 1st of September, to approve something that it agreed a couple of months ago, which is to boost production by 400,000 barrels a day. Now, the United States very much wants this. Other countries around the world, other member countries, are not at all sure. Kuwait, for example, has said in the course of the last 48 hours that they may have to reconsider that amount, or indeed that decision at all. So it all leaves West Texas Intermediate right now ahead by 1/3% at around $68 a barrel. And I just thought I'd give you, as we're here at the stock exchange, a couple of other interesting share prices. Generac, for example, is a company that makes, wait for this, they make generators. Now, all the power lines in America are above ground. So when something like this happens, that's why so many businesses go out. So Generac is based in Wisconsin. They make generators now badly needed in the south of the country. Shares up around 3 to 4% at the moment. Chevron, the big oil company, is up about 1/4%. Exxon's down 1/5%. And the most important share price of all at the moment for people in the area, Entergy, because Entergy is the company that provides the power to New Orleans and surrounding districts, and their share price is down 3% at the moment. As for the Dow, it's up and it's down, but we have records here again for the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ. Guys?
John, thanks very much indeed. John Terrett there in the New York Stock Exchange for us.
You're watching CGTN. Coming up, non-essential, then no travel. The EU restricts travellers from the United States because of the rapid spread of the Delta variant among unvaccinated Americans.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back. Just a reminder for you that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, we're available 24 hours a day on Freeview.
The European Union has recommended that its member states ban non-essential travel from the United States as infections and hospitalizations from the Delta variant surge across the US. Let's talk to Tony Waterman now, who joins us live from Brussels. Tony, this announcement from Brussels, not a surprise. We were expecting this, weren't we? We've got a slight problem with the sound there from Tony. We'll try and re-establish contact.
We have the EU now.
Tony, sorry, we lost you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we've got you now. So wherever you were, carry on with that. Thanks.
Well, I was just saying that, as you were right, that this was expected. There was speculation, but now it's been confirmed that the United States has been booted off of the EU's safe travel list. So this paves the way for the reintroduction of a ban on non-essential travel into the bloc. It was not just the United States that was booted off, but a handful of other countries, including Israel, Lebanon, and Montenegro. But the U.S. had just gotten on this list in June, and it was widely seen as a way to get Americans into Europe for the very crucial summer holiday season. But to stay on this list and to get on this list, a country needs to register fewer than 75 new infections on average per 100,000 people over a 2-week period. And the United States just does not meet this threshold anymore. We have the U.S. now recording more than 100,000 new hospitalizations on average every day. This is the highest that we've seen since January, and the EU does not want to take that risk. It was also never pleased at the fact that the invitation has never been returned. EU citizens are still banned from traveling to the United States and have been for well over a year now. There is a catch here, though, and that is that this council suggestion is just that. It is a recommendation, and each member state is going to be able to decide for itself how it wants to go forward.
And Tony, on the vaccine in Europe, signs that the program is stalling. Is that fair?
Yeah, this was a concern that was raised at the WHO Europe press briefing earlier today. And part of the reason why we have seen this increase in the number of infections here in Europe is because there are still a lot of people who are not vaccinated. The WHO Europe comprises of 53 member states, so it's much broader than just the EU 27. And as you'd imagine, there are very big discrepancies when it comes to immunization across the bloc. So you have some countries that are doing quite well, Belgium, Spain, Portugal, they all have immunization rates of about 70% or higher. But when you look at the low to middle income countries, they are struggling to immunize just 10% of their population. There are many frontline workers who are still waiting for that first jab. And this is really the group, the segment of society that the WHO is most concerned about. There is some hesitancy among these individuals, but there is also just a lack of access, a lack of vaccines, and also a lack of information. And the director of WHO Europe, Hans Klug, said today, actually issued a rather ominous warning about what's to come in the next couple of months. Take a listen.
Several countries are starting to observe an increased burden on hospitals and more deaths. Last week, there was an 11% increase in the number of deaths in the region, with one reliable projection expecting 236,000 deaths in Europe by December 1st.
So that's a pretty sobering projection for a region which has already registered 1.3 million deaths from COVID-19 since this pandemic began. And Klug saying that part of the reason some of these deaths are going to be attributed to the fact that there has been, he called it, exaggerated easing of restrictions and measures. And of course, that summer travel season where we saw a huge uptick in the number of people coming into the bloc, but also traveling within the bloc itself.
Tony, thanks very much indeed. Tony Waterman there in Brussels for us.
The frontrunners to replace the German Chancellor have faced off in a primetime election debate. German voters go to the polls in September to elect a new government, and for the first time in 16 years, Angela Merkel won't be on the ballot.
With polls showing the race tightening, Sunday night's debate saw the candidates trade barbs on everything from Germany's response to coronavirus to action on climate change. From Berlin, Trent Murray reports.
Centre stage and into the national spotlight. Three candidates with three very different visions for Germany. All came with a sales pitch to convince Germany's 60.4 million eligible voters that they're the ones best qualified to lead Europe's biggest economy. Riding a wave of rising poll numbers, the Social Democrats' Olaf Scholz focused on his lifetime of political experience, including as finance minister in Angela Merkel's coalition government.
I want a good coalition that makes progress in Germany possible, and that brings more respect in our society and secures the economical progress in our country. And to live up to our role, we are the biggest country in the European Union.
The Green Party's Annalena Baerbock, after several stumbles in recent months, came out swinging, branding Germany's traditional parties as out of touch with a changing electorate, especially on climate change.
Climate protection is vital for me in every coalition negotiation. The next German government must set the course for climate neutrality, and I think it just became very clear that this is obviously not the position of the Conservative Party.
And then there was Armin Laschet, Angela Merkel's anointed successor for the conservative CDU. Under pressure from his party and facing a collapse in personal approval ratings, he sought to use the debate stage to re-inject some much-needed energy into his campaign.
Gegenwind? I have always felt headwinds, even now. But don't we all feel it? The wind of change blowing in our faces. In such moments, we need steadfastness, reliability, and an inner compass.
Germany doesn't directly elect its Chancellor. Instead, it's a role that's almost always given to the leader of the largest party here in Parliament. Now, no one party will win an outright majority, meaning political experts here are now busy trying to predict who could form a coalition government out of all the different party options. But with the polls continuing to tighten, the only thing that's certain at this stage of the race is that the end result is anything but certain.
The candidates will have two more opportunities to debate each other in prime time before voters head to the polls next month. Exchanges which may well prove crucial in helping Germans decide who will lead them into a post-Angela Merkel era. Trent Murray, CGTN, Berlin.
Concerns over the global coffee supply are growing as Vietnam's exporting hub, Ho Chi Minh City, remains in lockdown. The country is a key producer of Robusta, the bitter-tasting bean used in instant coffee and some espresso blends. Wholesale Robusta prices have risen by about 50% so far this year.
The International Monetary Fund's chief economist has warned that emerging markets can't afford a repeat of the so-called taper tantrum. In 2013, the Federal Reserve signalled a sooner-than-expected withdrawal of stimulus, which triggered a surge in global borrowing costs. Peter Gopinath's comments came as the Fed prepares to dial back its pandemic support.
Dozens of United Airlines jets may not fly until early next year. The Wall Street Journal reported that Boeing 777-200 planes are still being inspected for safety after one jet suffered an engine failure in Denver in February. United had hoped to resume flying those planes this summer, but regulators are now considering extra inspections and a proposed modification.
China has issued strict new measures aimed at curbing young people's addiction to video games. The rules say users under the age of 18 will only be able to play games for 1 hour a day on Fridays, weekends and public holidays between 8 and 9 p.m. Tougher rules come after criticism describing online gaming as a threat to young people's eyesight, education and fitness.
You're watching CGTN. Coming up, a chaotic pullout and a once-in-a-century hurricane. We take a look at the crises the US president is facing.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very busy when we try to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Andrew Wilson and Robin Dyer. Our top stories. The US thwarts a rocket attack on Kabul airport as its final exit from Afghanistan nears its end.
Hurricane Ida roars ashore, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake.
And oil's stormy ride. Oil traders on edge as Hurricane Ida shuts down production in the Gulf.
Joe Biden is faced with the most acute crisis so far of his presidency. As the United States enters the final hours of a chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, a historic hurricane is pummeling Louisiana. Well, Caroline Malone joins me live now from Washington. So, Caroline, how much of an impact has the Afghan exit had on Biden's credentials?
Well, it's certainly having an impact on Biden's credentials. There is, of course, that ongoing situation that you mentioned at Kabul airport that's continuing to have an impact as well. We heard this morning from the Pentagon that US forces hit that ISIS target over the weekend in retaliation for the bomb threats. They also said they're aware of possible civilian casualties, and that's something that surely the US will be judged on as well. The ongoing rocket attacks on the Kabul airport, which underscores really that continued high threat there. And it's part of Biden's reasoning for why they have to abide by tomorrow's August 31st deadline for the US forces to be out. Look, this violence is coming at the end of the US 20-year military presence in Afghanistan, part of the aim of which was supposed to get rid of al-Qaeda. Well, now, arguably, there are worse groups such as ISIS-K, which the US is having to contend with. President Biden and the First Lady were actually at the Dover Air Base in Delaware on Sunday, and they were there because the remains of the US personnel who lost their lives in Kabul last week were returning to the US. And all of this is happening while those last evacuations are coming to an end in Afghanistan. The Pentagon saying again this morning that more than 120,000 people were evacuated total, including 5,000 Americans. But there is still concern here, particularly for US citizens and for the many Afghans who are supposed to be able to get to the US on SIVs, or special immigrant visas, and who haven't been able to make it here. All these things that Biden administration is being judged on. Now, the political opposition of Biden and some of his own party, in fact, have even been critical of the exit so far. The Biden administration will be aware, really, that this ongoing situation and these last 24 hours are crucial in how they're going to be judged.
So while this is all going on, we've also got Hurricane Ida pummeling Louisiana. And looking back to Hurricane Katrina 16 years ago, the slow response of the federal government was widely criticised. So how do you think Joe Biden is handling this crisis?
Well, after Biden met with the families of those American troops who lost their lives in Kabul, he actually went on to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, known as FEMA, in Washington to deal with the hurricane. I mean, he warned from there that Ida does pose a serious threat to life, possible devastation, power cuts, likely for weeks. But his presence at FEMA is really showing how seriously the Biden administration is taking this disaster, really in contrast with previous administrations. Biden also said that as soon as the storm passes, he is going to put the country's full might behind rescue and recovery, showing an active response, which, really contrasts as well. Well, Biden's team have actually rescheduled meetings he was due to have today with Ukraine's president until Wednesday. All of this because of the multiple crises that he's having to deal with at the same time. Afghanistan, we've mentioned, the hurricane, but let's not forget another big challenge, of course, the continued coronavirus pandemic. There are, at the moment, again, 1,000 people dying from COVID in the US every day, largely due to the Delta variant, but also because many people remain unvaccinated. So really, this is a critical week for Biden, how he's able to handle multiple crises at the same time, and they're all going to have an impact on how he is viewed going forward.
Caroline, thank you. Caroline Malone there in Washington.
German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas travels to Tajikistan on Monday for talks on Afghanistan. Germany is concerned about the possibility of a new influx of Afghan refugees. Tajikistan is seen as one of the possible routes to Europe. Alyosha Milenkovic reports now from the Tajik-Afghan border.
Somewhere behind these mountains is the Afghanistan border. That's where we are heading this morning. After a 5-hour drive from the capital Dushanbe and a meeting with Tajikistan's secret service on the border town of Kulob, we've reached it.
We are driving along the river Panj, which is effectively the border between Tajikistan and Afghanistan. The Tajik border guards asked us not to stop along this way, along this route, because from time to time the Taliban are shooting at the people and vehicles from this side of the road. According to them, nobody can guarantee our safety here.
As we drove, we didn't see too much activity in the villages and roads on the other side of the river. This is the bridge that used to transport goods between the two countries. Now it is closed. Despite being told by Tajikistan security not to stop on the border, we stopped anyway to film the Afghanistan military border post next to the bridge. It seemed deserted entirely, with no one inside. Further down the road, we heard several bursts of gunfire far away on the Afghanistan side. At a nearby village, we spoke with its head, who tried to convince us that all is good in that area. A very different story from what the Tajikistan officials told us.
We have heard that the Taliban grabbed the power there, but here everything is calm. We live as before. We know that we are not in danger yet, but we don't know what would happen in the future.
Driving back through this breathtaking scenery, we again stopped in the town of Kulob. where the locals shared with us their concerns and thoughts.
What's happening now in Afghanistan makes us in Tajikistan very concerned. We are now afraid of the war in Tajikistan because of that. We want freedom, calm and peace, and we pray for the same to our neighbors. We are simple people and we want just that.
I'm confident the Taliban won't attack us. They have no motives to do that. I'm not afraid. I worked in Afghanistan for 3 years. The Taliban don't want war, they want peace.
The Tajikistan government doesn't share that opinion, as it's recently started joint military drills with the Russian forces along the border with Afghanistan. Alyosha Milenkovic, CGTN, at the Tajikistan-Afghanistan border.
The UN Atomic Energy Agency says the DPRK appears to have restarted its Yongbyon nuclear reactor. The IAEA annual report says the reactor's been discharging cooling water since July.
This is the first sign of operational activity at the reactor since December 2018, months after then US President Donald Trump met Kim Jong-un in Singapore. Our correspondent Jack Barton in Seoul has more.
Yeah, the Yongbyon nuclear reactor is a big deal. It's not the only nuclear processing plant that the DPRK has, but it's certainly by far and away the largest when it comes to processing weapons-grade nuclear materials. And as you mentioned, it was essentially shuttered back in December 2018 when things seemed to be going in the right direction between negotiations between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. But we're told that Kim Jong-un wanted to permanently dismantle the Yongbyon plant in return for concessions at the Hanoi summit, the last summit with Trump, and it was the failure to get that agreement that really led to those talks falling apart and the long stall we've had in the diplomacy ever since. So it is very significant that it appears to be operational again, and very alarming, or deeply troubling, as the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency described it. As you mentioned, it's been operational since July, it appears, in processing plutonium from spent fuel rods. But the nuclear watchdog also says that the part of Yongbyon that provides heat for that process has actually been active since the start of the year. So in total, there does seem to have been activity for a lot longer than since just July. A muted reaction so far from South Korea, the Unification Ministry, the Defense Ministry and the Foreign Ministry all saying they're simply observing nuclear matters in the DPRK for now, waiting for further evidence. Also a muted response from Washington, with the White House saying that diplomacy and dialogue are the way forward.
A new coronavirus variant could evade vaccines and be more infectious than other mutations, scientists have warned. The C12 strain was first detected in South Africa in May and has been linked to increased transmissibility. It's since been found in England, China, New Zealand, Portugal and Switzerland. According to experts at South Africa's National Institute for Communicable Diseases, the strain has a mutation rate of about 41.8 times per year.
California's Caldor fire has moved closer to Lake Tahoe, leading to more evacuation orders and warnings, as well as road closures. Flames have spread to the mountains just a few miles southwest of the area, and thick smoke has forced tourists to leave. The fire has been active for 2 weeks and has spread across nearly 245 square miles. More than 600 structures have been destroyed, and at least 18,000 more are under threat.
Sicily's Mount Aetna erupted on Sunday, spewing lava and sending up plumes of ash. The debris also fell on some villages on the slopes of the volcano, but didn't affect flights at the nearby airport. Aetna is the largest of Italy's 3 active volcanoes and had its last eruption earlier this month on August the 10th.
Firefighters in Milan have extinguished a blaze that destroys a 20-storey apartment building. No deaths have been reported. Residents said the fire quickly spread through the cladding on the facade, which was supposed to have been fire-resistant. The city's mayor has demanded an investigation.
Still to come on the programme, things come to a head for the craft beer industry. Why times are tough, even though the pubs are open.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
The fight against poverty has suffered a setback.
We are at a turning point in history.
There's a world under great distress and disruption.
But solving the crisis is still possible.
Change is indeed coming.
Join me, Stephen Cole, for a special 1 hour-long show here on CGTN where we speak to some of the world's top leaders and experts standing on the front line of the fight against poverty.
It's a real mistake to think that the future is decided for us. We need dialogue.
We'll spark debate.
The biggest challenge is addressing inequality.
We'll explore the solutions.
This can be done, but it requires everybody working together.
And we'll showcase the success stories to reveal how the cycle of poverty can be broken. Innovation, action, change. Only on CGTN.
Welcome back. A staggering 8 billion pints of beer were sold in the UK in 2019. But just as things were looking good for the brewing industry, the onset of the coronavirus pandemic meant pubs and restaurants were forced to close for much of 2020.
The impact is still being felt, especially among smaller brewers that run on tight profit margins. And now as sales increase to near pre-pandemic levels, there's fear that a change in UK tax laws might force some breweries to turn off the taps for good. John Beaver has this report.
A sight that brewers have long been waiting for. Hundreds of people enjoying a beer on a warm summer's evening. The easing of lockdown restrictions has allowed events like this craft beer festival in Bristol to go ahead and provided a huge boost to a struggling industry.
Big events like this, will we have 4,000 people or so over the weekend. It's great. It's great to be back with people. Yeah, beer, food, it's about bringing people together, and you know, a festival does that on a much larger scale than maybe a pub or a restaurant, but just being around people is the heart of what this is all about. So yeah, it's awesome.
The pandemic has had a devastating impact on all aspects of the pub trade. As premises were forced to close their doors, those supplying them saw years of hard work evaporate in just a few weeks.
We had to go into full survival mode, and majority of our sales is draft to pub customers. So obviously pubs shut, and we had a bit of a struggle kind of keeping things afloat. But luckily we had loads of loyal kind of off-trade, basically suppliers and customers that kind of kept us afloat and allowed us to kind of emerge on the right side of things.
With beer sales dramatically up on last year's record lows, there's now another challenge. Proposed changes to the so-called small breweries relief might see just over 150 companies having to pay more tax.
It's incredibly difficult for small breweries. I mean, not only with regards to access to pubs, so getting your beer into pubs, which is, largely controlled by large pub companies and by the global brewers. Also, getting beer into supermarkets. Most of the beer in supermarkets is from the global brewers. So it's incredibly difficult. And actually, Small Brewers Relief was a part of that. It was to give small breweries a chance to compete with global rivals, help them invest in the business, help them get those beers into the market.
The Treasury hasn't confirmed if or when the changes might happen, but there are fears for the future. One study found that 83% of independent breweries produced less beer last year because of the pandemic. And after a promising few months after lockdown restrictions were lifted, for many, there are now more questions than answers about the long-term future of Britain's smaller breweries. John Beaver, CGTN, London.
Monday marks 100 days since China's Mars rover Zhurong started its exploration of the Red Planet. And the mission's chief designer says the rover's journey is far from over. CGTN's Swen Ya has more.
It has been 100 days since the Zhurong rover set foot on the Red Planet for an unprecedented journey. It has traveled over 1,060 meters. It has sent back gigabytes of raw data. It has taken pictures of the Martian landscape. It has even paid tribute to the 2022 Winter Olympic Games to be held in Beijing. China's first Mars mission has been declared a complete success, and the rover has even outlived its 3-month life expectancy. But it won't retire just yet.
I know you are all keen to know its status, and now I tell you, the rover is functioning normally, but come mid-September to early November, over the period of sun outage, communication will be disrupted with Earth, so the probe will suspend scientific exploration during that period. When the signal recovers, we will update on its assignment.
Now the rover's findings are ready to be analyzed.
The gathered data is now available for scientists to apply and decipher, including data about the Martian underground structure and data on Martian weather. We expect discoveries from our first-hand source material.
The chief designer also says the rover will stay on course and move further south to an area where ancient Martian land and sea meets. The border area is expected to deliver some most anticipated stats and data. Sun Ye, CGTN, Beijing.
Construction of the world's largest Legoland resort has begun in the city of Shenzhen in China. 20,000 Lego bricks have arrived at the construction site for an opening ceremony. Legoland Shenzhen will cover approximately 580,000 square metres. The park is expected to open in 2024.
The headlines again. The US thwarts a rocket attack on Kabul airport as its final exit from Afghanistan nears its end.
Hurricane Ida roars ashore, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake.
And oil's stormy ride. Oil traders on edge as Hurricane Ida shuts down production in the Gulf.
Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, Africa Live. See you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.